Hello! Welcome to part 2 of Shin Godzilla, A Fractured Diamond. This part will be focused on the human side of the story, up to a certain point anyway. As before, there will be references to future sections that will not be present in this video because this is only part of what will be one large video. That being said, there is still plenty to be seen here, which will hopefully whet your appetite until the next video. Right, all that said, let's get on with it, shall we? Taken from an angle hitherto untaken. Nor the monster, really Godzilla, without a human element. The human side of Shin Godzilla begins with Shimura from the Ministry of Defense telling Yagachi, the Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary, some of the details of the steam eruption in Tokyo Bay. Normally I have to put some effort into finding out the names of characters, but Shin Godzilla decided to be very helpful and throw text up on the screen for me. From characters to locations to vehicles, all get themselves a label on the screen to allow the audience to know who is talking, what this thing is, or where the film is at that moment. Shin Godzilla does this throughout its runtime, and I'm honestly in two minds about it. For the most part, it gets around awkward dialogue and allows scenes to flow by preventing introductions every time a new character appears on screen. Are there to do a job. It also removes the required audience insert character who doesn't know anything and needs everything explained to them. Even Godzilla King of the Monsters, as good as it is, does this.
Who is he?
Sam Coleman.
Something bigger, meaner.
We don't know that, Rick.
Oh yeah? Just wait for it, Chen.
All that being said, I can see this as a sign of laziness. Rather than attempting to organically work character names into the scenes, the writers said sod it and used text instead. The text also means scenes don't have to flow visually. You can have text declare where you are every shot and not have them connected meaningfully. This is all using a pessimistic mindset though. Given the amount of benefits the text provides, I doubt it was done flippantly. However, I imagine it would be an arse and a half to keep up with all the text in a dubbed version of the film, by the use of the text, but we'll get there when we get there. Back to the events of Shin Godzilla, Yagachi and Shimura enter the first meeting of this film and begin asking questions about the boiling sea, not many of which have answers yet. It's decided any decisions will be put on hold until the and if that sounds overly bureaucratic, then the film is doing its job. At the site of the growing disaster, the the general public in this film. Catastrophe is one more point of interest on the road of life, until it takes an interest in you, before the second meeting of the film. It is true there are a lot of meetings in Shin Godzilla. Before Godzilla runs back into the sea, there are 10 different meetings that take place, from casual to private to critical. Seeing these happen, seeing the film going from one room to the other, looks like a farce, and, unfortunately, it is. As the Prime Minister joins the second meeting, ideas are thrown around hither and thither about what might be causing the budding disaster. Yagachi, fast becoming the main protagonist, offers a theory. A large creature is causing the trouble. This is quickly slapped down in favour of an alternative which, although just as implausible considering the reality of things, is suggested by someone higher up the political chain, so it's accepted.
Another idea forwarded is a new large hydrothermal vent.
Come on, a vent directly above the tunnel? Past geological surveys would have uncovered it years ago.
A few moments later.
The cause is a new volcano or a large thermal vent. It can't be anything else.
Yes, good idea.
Decisions made, it's off to meeting number 3, during which it appears things are calming down. Again, Yagachi mentions a creature. Again, he's told to pipe down. Until that is, Godzilla's tail appears for all to see. With that, it's back to the sofas for meeting number 4 and a discussion as to what to do about the, now confirmed, creature. This time the political chain gets a kink in it. Money makes the world go round, and the costs Godzilla is incurring fuels the overbearing want to kill him. But this decision is cut off by the danger of damaging the surrounding area and the negative views it will cause. Politics, am I right? I'm going to jump ahead briefly to connect two situations. Yagachi, frustrated with the lack of direction or decisions being made, turns to the people at his table. They include the Assistant Chief Cabinet Secretary, the Defense Operations Policy Director General, the Deputy Director of Japan's Meteorological Agency, and some other people who also probably have equally unnecessarily long job descriptions. Yagachi asks them all to find any information they can find on the Proto-Godzilla currently causing their government all sorts of bother. Their response?
Sorry, who are you addressing?
Later on in the film, when the, as they put it, are called in, the same is asked of them in arguably less defined terms, and they set about doing what they can. These two reactions are dark reflections of one another. Same situations, same requests, different results. This will decide how everything plays out. This will also embody the critical response to the real-life disaster. Meeting number 5 begins and ends with the Prime Minister garnering the opinions of 3 experts whose offerings are as useful as a rubber duck in a sword fight.
The TV images, it's indiscernible.
I can't say for certain without an examination.
Since I don't know if this footage is legitimate, I cannot say.
Put a pin in this for later. Gashira, part of the government's wildlife division, who will be one of the nerds later in the film. In meeting number 6, Ogashira is more forthcoming with opinions and information on Godzilla, but despite being so helpful, the results are the same.
This creature, it appears to be serpentine with auxiliary ambulation, and even though it possesses gills, it also has legs just like a lungfish does.
If it has legs, then can it come on land?
Yes, it's a possibility.
A few moments later.
I apologize for the Deputy Chief's lack of decorum, but just as your experts have already concluded, I believe the creature coming on land is quite improbable.
Just like Yagachi and his creature suggestion from earlier, Ogashira suggesting Godzilla could come on land is dismissed because someone higher up the chain has decided otherwise. It doesn't seem to matter that this higher decision was garnered from experts, supposedly the ones who were not helpful in the slightest 5 minutes earlier. We even get this guy sitting at the Prime Minister's table giving Ogashira the evils for having dared give her opinion, which they brought her in for. Ogashira's analysis dismissed, the
positively identify what sort of animal it is, but we don't believe that it can come on land. Our experts believe its own weight would crush it to death.
This is the start of events being affected by the Prime Minister's main focus in this film, the public.
Like Akasaka said, you were only supposed to give verified info.
I wanted to reassure the public.
Up to this point, he has ignored Yagachi, not for lacking information on his opinion, which he is, but for making a mockery of things. When Godzilla is confirmed to be a thing, one of the reasons he isn't killed straight away is public opinion. And not only Ogashira's but Yagachi's opinions are dismissed due to hierarchical standards, something the Prime Minister would stick to keep people happy. The conference is but one more step in many the Prime Minister takes towards catastrophe.
Act, sir.
Cut to a montage of the government getting their act together and organising evacuations and crisis management teams. This includes meetings 7 and 8, which we are, thankfully, spared from the majority of. This sequence of events is where Shin Godzilla's fast pace is at its most evident, as we go from scene to scene to scene, an audio-visual info dump that ends rather abruptly with a very poignant cut.
That's certainly going to give the Prime Minister pause.
This is probably the most sympathetic the film gets for the Prime Minister. His actions are mostly seen as incorrect, based on an almost selfish need to save face rather than get the job done, evident enough to not need deliberating over. But in this cut, we are presented with the admission that making such important decisions is not what many would want, only to show the Prime Minister, the one person who must make such decisions. As much as decisions he will make soon and later will also be considered bad, it is from here on in that each one will be tinged with sympathy. The poignant cut leads into meeting number 9, where the Prime Minister is being urged to sign off on using the SDF, the Self-Defense Force. This is not the first time the SDF has featured in the Godzilla franchise, nor I doubt will it be the last. Once upon a time, Japan wasn't allowed to have a standing military force, but over the years this was changed to being allowed to have one for, well, self-defense. This has changed further to include helping other people out, but the root of the organization still remains. Which is why it amuses me to no end that Shin Godzilla has a scene where Japan is being attacked by a giant monster and a group of political suits with a rule book are arguing over whether Godzilla falls into the right category to be shot at. Back to the meeting, it's fascinating to watch as one member of parliament after another gives their opinions, in some cases apparently ignoring what the others had just said. Once again, maximum sympathy is applied to the Prime Minister as he struggles to collate all the conflicting information being thrown at him, which is quickly tempered by his shock over having... What else are you going to do, bake a cake? In fact, the Prime Minister asks for an inspection before deciding anything. An inspection in the middle of an active disaster. Now that's bureaucracy. What I do like is everything said here has import. It's not just random waffle thrown in for the hell of it. Be it public safety, affirmative action, sticking to the rules, or simply kicking the Prime Minister up the backside. This helps to understand how much the Prime Minister has to think about with each decision he has to make. The speed and efficiency at which all these opinions and bits of information are given gives the impression that this happens a lot, and that's not a good thing. Finally, the SDF are called for and the meeting is over, leading two MPs to natter about how well things are going.
What a relief this is. That thing will be dead soon. I'm sure the choppers will make short work of it.
Yeah, I bet we could turn its carcass into a big tourist attraction.
Sirs, just as a reminder, the old Imperial Army thought like that. During the last war, their armchair theories led to the loss of 3 million Japanese lives, so beware of unfounded optimism.
It was quite a surprise to hear this, and not an unpleasant one. Godzilla films have always been a reference to what America did to Japan, mainly because it was so unthinkably horrific. But it's rare to hear anything about what Japan did to Japan. In this case, the film is referencing the old generals of the military whose ideas about American softness turned out to be incorrect. There's also a surprising parallel to the generals' inability to admit defeat because they wanted to save face with the Japanese public. It's a significant parallel to the situation in the film and, by proxy, the people in charge during the 2011 disaster. I see what you did there, film. We see a fireman requesting information about where to put people.
Local.
Up until this point, we've followed Godzilla and the government, and by proxy the military. The only other people we've seen are random civilians casually taking selfies, running screaming, that sort of thing. Seeing and hearing from someone with boots on the ground is a brief slap in the face that this isn't a government playing at disaster. This panicked voice from below is a reminder that everything this bunch of suits is deciding is affecting and will affect a lot of people. Back with events at hand, and we're in meeting number 10. We're also back with Godzilla as the SDF helicopters fly in to confront him, and it's here, now, that I can talk about the awkwardness of this scene. I said earlier Godzilla stops and stands there for a bit, for no apparent, in-universe reason. But there is a plot reason. The helicopters are ready to shoot, but oh no, there are some old people walking around nearby. Finally, the Prime Minister is, once again, required to make a decision. The attack is stopped, the helicopters. This is almost the most outstandingly bad the writing gets in this film. Almost. There is a purpose to it, I'll give it that, being that we could look back on and say, if only they'd done such and such. This would cement the fact that the government at the time was making the wrong decisions at the worst times. The problem is, the scene itself is odd. We need a scene where Godzilla has the potential to be killed. That's easy enough. Stick some helicopters in front of him and job's a good un. But now the scene needs people in the area to be endangered. Not too many. That might give the impression that not firing was the right decision. So only a few people need to be in the scene. 2, as it turns out. And these people need to be nearby so they are within the area of effect of any weaponry. This is a problem since Godzilla has been continuously moving since he emerged from the sea, only stopping briefly to mutate.
It's evolving.
No, that's not evolving, that's mutating, there's a difference. Anyway, if Godzilla is moving, then he's not going to be near anyone for very long. Instead, they make him stop in his tracks and stand there waiting to be killed. Now we just need the people to be close by. This leads to one of the weirdest shots in the film.
We just spotted a few civilians near the line of fire.
Civvies present. Can we fire?
I mentioned earlier about the text info dumps leading to disjointed scenes. Here is an example of that style of editing going wrong. I don't know where this is. The film doesn't even make an attempt to show you where this is. No flow of camera work, no text, nothing. We're told they're nearby and that's that. But think about the logistics of this. Were they next to Godzilla and now they're moving away from him? If so, why weren't they spotted when the helicopters arrived? And if they're only so far away, why weren't they killed by Godzilla? If they've only just arrived, why are they moving towards Godzilla? Simply put, these people being here don't make any sense, and neither does Godzilla stopping so he can be near them. Both are nonsensical events which negatively affect reason and understanding, which in turn will affect investment in the story, at which point enjoying the film in any meaningful way will be very, very difficult. After Godzilla runs off, we get various panoramic shots with news reports narrated over the top. Even when the disaster isn't occurring, the film keeps up its frenzied pace. We're led to this scene which bears a resemblance to the damage the 2011 tsunami caused, which makes sense considering the method of destruction. This is a deliberate visual reminder of the real-world disaster, closely followed by 2 verbal reminders.
It was ashore for what, maybe 2 hours? And it did all this?
No. We did, wasting time with our response.
We didn't know what it could do. It surprised us.
And we've seen the many meetings over so many details that delayed actions. But these lines also reference why the real-life tsunami was so bad. Earthquake detectors were only accurate up to a certain magnitude, giving false impressions of severity. Blood barriers were designed for, quote-unquote, reasonably sized tsunami waves, making them insufficient against the much larger waves. and the Fukushima nuclear power plant disaster was made worse by internal feuds and delays in sharing information. Despite this reference, we still get some sympathy thrown their way.
Everyone did their best in the circumstances.
The resonance of this scene was clearly on the film's mind, which is why we get this quiet moment of mourning from Yagachi. It's made all the more impactful as the film's snappish pace slows to a crawl to allow the scene to seep in. For me, this helped a lot to wash out the taste of the previous scene's silliness and bring the significance of the film back into focus. We join a search party scouring the sea for signs of Godzilla, unsuccessfully. Then we have meetings 11, 12, and 13 with the Prime Minister, SDF, and the pains in the arse. As Parliament and the SDF work out search and defense strategies, Yagachi calls his mate Izumi to gather some unlikely-minded candidates for brainstorming. This is the scene I referenced earlier in comparison to the not-so-helpful government suits. Unlike them, the nerds are throwing ideas out all over the shop, which leads to a hypothesis.
The answer is nuclear fission.
This idea comes out of bloody nowhere. Up until this point in the film, nothing about nuclear power, pollution, or weapons has even been hinted at. So there's no surprise when Ogashira is laughed at by Yasuda, another of the nerds at the table.
Sense of humor, Miss Agashira? That's impossible.
Only for Ogashira to be proven right minutes later when radiation is detected where Godzilla had been walking around.
This data shows radiation spikes that match the path the creature took.
This was a random, seemingly insane theory with no inspiration or proof of validity that by completely unrelated events ended up being proven right. This is not the last, or even the first, time the film does this. Definitely keep this in mind for later. We are then shown the Americans are getting involved, first with a meeting with the Prime Minister, and then with... sorry, what was I saying? This beautiful short stack is Kyoko. She is looking for someone, a Japanese professor named Goro Maki, who we'll be talking about later. Instead, I'm going to leave this on screen for a bit for everyone to have a read. Kyoko asks Yagachi for help and he happily returns with what they could find, which includes documents from the boat at the start of the film. Yep, that was Maki's boat, found right over the spot where Godzilla emerged. Interesting. In return, Kyoko provides Yagachi with Maki's notes, or the ones they have at least, which leads to the film finally naming Godzilla.
Godzilla?
He gave it an English name.
Gojira.
A few fun facts here. Maki's boat, the Glory Maru, shares its name with the first boat Gojira sank in 1954, only translated to English. Maki names the then theoretical monster Gojira after an ancient sea god from his home of Odo Island. Not only is this a direct carryover from Gojira 1954, but the island is the first place Gojira lands in that film. And last but not least, the photo of Maki used in the folder is actually of Kihachi Okamoto, a director who influenced the director of Shin Godzilla, who in turn paid homage to Okamoto in his own work. Nice. We then enter another meeting being led by Kyoko.
What comes next? Personal service.
The next few scenes are incredibly dense, but thanks to the fast pace the film has maintained so far, the audience is prepared for the information about to be machine gunned at them. Kyoko informs after feeding on poorly regulated nuclear waste. She readout that no one can decipher. Yet. Meeting apparently over, we're shown, but thankfully spared, meetings to do with passing bills, and comments are made about how quickly the one about Godzilla passed. This leads oh so subtly into the discovery that Godzilla's body harbours undiscovered nuclear materials.
Well, this certainly explains why the US Department of Energy moved so quickly.
Cut to the troublemakers talking about Godzilla's DNA, mutations, extermination, and behaviour. From this brainstorm, a plan is devised. A plan I will discuss properly later. For now, I shall simply refer to it as the plan. Time passes and there's this shot of what looks to be protesters, but having watched and listened to this several times, I haven't been able to work out what they're going on about. It feels random, even more so when the next scenes talk about how everyone is getting along outside of normal departmental processes, working easily, efficiently, and all through the night without complaint, except for Yagachi's stench. Perhaps this is meant to be a juxtaposition between the conflicts arising from politics and how things can get done if they are ignored, if only temporarily. If that is the case, the film might also provide evidence to the contrary. Stick a pin in that. All the positivity is ruined by the return of Godzilla. No, not that one. This one.
Gojira's evolved.
Mutated. We enter what will be the Prime Minister's final meeting, with everyone acknowledging Godzilla's change. Those gathered gawp at Godzilla's size, his trudging through the city, the threat he poses, most of which is nuclear related.
An armed assault on its body has potential risks, namely the release of radioactive materials into the surrounding region.
If this Gojira were to attack a nuclear facility, the disaster would be far worse.
Not only is this a genuine threat, considering his nuclear waste goblin origin, but an ode to Godzilla films of old. It still bothers me no one explores this further, either here or later. Destination ignored, the meeting continues.
We must stop it, and stop it now.
And also because if we don't, we'll be viewed overseas as timid.
Really? That's what you're thinking about? Anyway, it's decided they need to attack Godzilla and either kill him or drive him off. To that end, the SDF are summoned and attack plans are devised. Soon the city is littered with soldiers, tanks, helicopters, and heavy artillery ready to take on Godzilla. Their plan? To stop him from going beyond the river by any means necessary. Which goes well. A random note, but I like some of the filming in this film. There is a fair amount of lining up of random stuff that lends them an artistic flair. Expansive shots that really emphasize distance. And dramatic close-ups that work well with the fast pace. The reason I mention these now is up until this point we were seeing them mostly in offices and meetings with human characters sitting or standing around talking. The close-ups of faces, the distant shots of whole rooms give these scenes more character and energy than they otherwise would have. This is important for a film that takes place majoritively inside offices and meeting rooms with political types discussing procedures, rules and regulations. But then we're into the action, and all these shots are replicated here as well, to almost any situation, and soldiers risking their lives out on the battlefield. Back to events at hand, we discover that with one flip of a bridge, he's also withstood so much damage they are mostly out of ammo. We then see everyone's reactions, half of which are dumbstruck, whilst the others scramble to think of something to do. Evacuations are ordered and suggestions are made to get the Americans involved, only to find out they are already on their way. Along with their upcoming bombing run commencing earlier than expected, and the earlier meeting about Godzilla being rushed by them, you get the feeling Americans in Shin Godzilla are being depicted as quick on the draw to the point of pushing boundaries. This might have some significance later. With Godzilla cutting a swath through Tokyo with absolutely no one curious as to where he's going, the Prime Minister is advised to leave for safer havens. This is the most heroic the Prime Minister will be in the film.
For the nation to function, you need to leave for the secondary facility in Tachikawa.
Besides that, I can't abandon the citizens here.
Given how the political tomfoolery has been depicted so far, it is hard to work out if the film is being scathing of the Prime Minister fleeing, or sad that the time he finally makes the right decision, he gets punished for it. Or this might just be a mechanical outcome of events. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. Once again, the scene is reminiscent of one from Gojira. We also see Ogashira casually walking away whilst everyone else is in a panic. A sneaky character moment for her. The haste of the evacuees is quickly thwarted by traffic, forcing everyone to leave their cars. It is here we see, or hear, one of the weirdest parts of the film. How did he not hear those footsteps beforehand? The beat traffic of evacuation brought to silence by the booming footsteps of Godzilla. But it makes very little sense and stands out amongst the otherwise grounded film. Unfortunately, this won't be the last such event. In the silence, Yagachi announces,
"So that's Gojira."
Up until now, despite the last few days talking constantly about, or because of him, Yagachi has only seen Godzilla on screens. Now he can see the terror of Tokyo with his own eyes. What I imagine, the Prime Minister has time to see the start of the attack before lifting off, and Yagachi has a moment to see a laser cutting through the skies before heading to safety, is of huddled masses cowering in the dark, and the helicopter of the Prime Minister and his cabinet being rent from the skies. Mention a few more from the human side of things, which, honestly, mess things up a little. Yagachi is here when he sees Godzilla. He looks like he's down the road from him, how far away he is. He's then present and able to see the laser shoot into the sky. After this happened. Because of Yagachi, I have spent a lot of time trying to work out where the fire went. Others, it's behind and beside him. The overhead shot, while looking fantastic, makes it very hard to work out where the fire went in relation to Godzilla. On first viewing, I saw this, coupled with the behind and side fires, to be the area all around Godzilla, his fire having engulfed everything in all directions. But this can't be the case, otherwise Yagachi would have been skywalkered.
This way! What's that glow?
It doesn't help, making it even harder to work out in which direction the fire went. On the one hand, this ambiguity of logistics makes it so Yagachi can be presumed safe. On the other, it completely takes away the understanding of events and, therefore, the stakes. How much danger can anyone be in if the film is happy to bail them out with confusion, says the Prime Minister. On a lesser note, we have this cringeworthy line from the American bombers. It reminds me of
I'm spitting!
or the absolutely golden
Got him! Take that, you dinosaur!
Something I didn't notice until I began analysing this film properly was what this scene looks like. Americans dropping bombs on a Japanese city, and the city going up in nuclear flames. It's almost a recreation of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, one of the inspirations for the original Godzilla. Godzilla cutting those bombers out of the sky could be the wrath or resentment of a nation given form. Given the comparison Yagachi made to the old Imperial generals earlier in the film, the lasering of the Prime Minister and company could also be seen as a nation's wrathful strike, both at the warlords of the past and the politicians of today. The fact there are 3 bombers rather than 2 is probably a deliberate attempt to muddy the comparison, even though there were 2 bombing runs here. But given this possible interpretation, the sorrowful music suddenly has far more weight to it. So, with the American bombers destroyed, the Japanese Prime Minister atomized by what is apparently referred to as the resignation beam, bit harsh, and the Beastie Boy falling into hibernation, we are caught up with Godzilla's side of the story. But whilst Godzilla sleeps, the human cast is still getting down to business. As we're treated to this spectacularly glorious shot of the horrific devastation wrought by Godzilla, we are bombarded with news reports about what happened.
For at least another 49 hours.
How much radiation the creature has released on Tokyo is still unknown.
Injuries, supplies, lack of leadership, refugees, the press, radiation, deaths. Information comes at us from one person or another. Once again, the camera work is doing its part to tell the tale. Previous shots of office equipment were neatly organised and aesthetically pleasing, but a few quick images show us the new headquarters is less organised, a chaotic tangle of wires and piled up equipment. All this builds up to...
Don't go to pieces!
Calm down first, okay?
The silence is deafening. Deliberately or not, this scene links quite nicely to the sympathetic scene with the Prime Minister. Yagachi and the Prime Minister are being bombarded with opinions and information, and are both expected to handle them professionally. The Prime Minister, though with some sympathy, is shown as slow and almost idiotic in the face of this onslaught. Yagachi, the character we, the audience, have been following and potentially are meant to sympathise with the most, a character who was critical of the government's handling of the earlier disaster, winds up in a similar situation to the Prime Minister, only to crack under the pressure. Once again, the mirror reflects darkly. Yagachi asks the important question: who's in charge? We're told it's this guy because of his seniority, and because no one else wanted the job. This brings up questions about his suitability as leader, and his impending decisions regards Godzilla, which aren't exactly helped by this line.
Noodles got soggy. I knew this job wasn't going to be easy, but come on.
Somehow, this line needs to end up in common vernacular. His noodles have gone soggy definitely needs to be a euphemism for going senile or losing your mind or something like that. Anyway, Izumi brings up Yagachi becoming Prime Minister, which Yagachi is initially dismissive of.
You want his job?
Not right now, but maybe in 10 years.
If you don't like politicians, why'd you become one?
Because it's just friend or foe. It's simple. I like that.
Then Yagachi is off to see the social rejects and get right back into organising the plan. Kyoko, who we last saw briefly looking very upset during Godzilla's rage out, reappears to bring bad tidings to the new Prime Minister. There is a growing sentiment amongst world leaders to wrangle control of the Godzilla situation out of Japan's and America's hands. This leads to a Japanese-American research coalition.
Something like a built-in phased array radar.
Then that means it can instinctively detect and intercept any approaching object.
Even from behind. Alright film, well played.
Abilities like these, it could rapidly colonize the entire world.
Apparently, this is what's left over from another storyline in which Godzilla was going to duplicate himself. Rather than what we have now, the film would end with a Godzilla with 2 torsos that would be reminiscent of The Thing. It would certainly have made Shin Godzilla even more distinguishable from the other Godzilla films, and may even have made it more well known. In the end, I think a singular Godzilla keeps him unique, and honestly, he's horrifying enough as it is without having a semi-conjoined twin as well. A handy bit of sequel material, and it gives the American team a reason to phone it in.
Let's go.
The defense secretary wants to use a warhead against Godzilla. The missile they're going to use is the B-83, which is 75 times stronger than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima.
It's funny how the idea of dropping a nuke on a giant monster is almost a meme in films, but it stemmed from very real events that were far from humorous. Shin Godzilla using it and discussing it with the fear it deserves brings the subject back to its roots. However, I'm not 100% on why they needed to include the historical photos.
She lived through the last 2.
It possibly could have been more poignant to overlay the old photos with wrecked buildings from the film, but on their own, they seem like a very obvious and lazy attempt to get an emotional response. Simply put, it's very jarring. Speaking of, Old Soggy Noodles finishes a conference call with the US President, confirming the bombing attack, then asks to see Akasaka, who we've seen a few times during the course of the film. Here we see him using his instant transmission ability.
Get the Chief Cabinet Secretary.
This is such an odd bit of editing, it confused me the first time I saw it. Again, I think the text on screen workaround is encouraging some bad filming behaviours. On R, earlier meeting room scenes and discussions between characters. Now, after Godzilla's attack and with the announcement of the nuclear threat, silence is becoming more and more prevalent. This allows for the impact of the news to sink in.
Isn't there some other way?
This leads into the scene between Akasaka and Yagachi discussing the upcoming nuclear attack and the alternative, the plan. Some of the lines in this scene are surprisingly meaningful.
Post-war Japan is a tributary state.
Silly me was confused because all I could think of was, Japan is a river state? Looking the phrase up enlightened me. A state that pays tribute to others. This is obviously referring to the Japanese-American relationship.
Post-war extends forever, huh?
The discussion is all about politics, economics, plans going forward, all in reference to Godzilla and the nuclear attack. Both of these are references now, then, and forevermore, of the effects of nuclear weapons and pollution. But here they are also being connected to Japan's recovery after the Second World War, and after American military forces left the country in a period known as post-occupation Japan, which makes this line very profound.
You have to understand, I have to look ahead and think about what's best for a post-Gojira Japan.
Hold on to that for a moment. At the end of this scene, and after several attempts from Yagachi to make Akasaka go with the plan, Akasaka utters this line.
Yagachi, this is the reality. All else is just a dream.
This sounded familiar, and I was sure it was in Gojira 1954. However, this dramatically deep statement had me laughing after I discovered it wasn't in the original film. It was, in fact, in Godzilla King of the Monsters! !
You have your fear, which might become reality. And you have Godzilla, which is reality.
Who'd have thunk it? These scenes of quiet contemplation, understanding, and acceptance of the situation are abruptly ended by the troublemakers reacting to the news of the bomb.
What? They're going to use a thermonuclear missile?
That's insane.
And drop that thing here? There's still so much we don't know. Gojira might even be immortal.
Man is more frightening to me than Gojira.
The camera work and music help to convey the shock and horror the news brings to get the plan ready. As they work, a deadline is established. 2 weeks until the radiation levels in Godzilla return to normal and he awakens. Japan is given that time to evacuate Tokyo. Akasaka, who's getting quite a few big lines at this point, says this.
They told me they'd do the same if Gojira would have surfaced in New York.
In the 1998 American film, Godzilla landed and nested in New York City. At no point did the concept of nuking the place ever come up. I see what you did there, film. A sneaky exchange in the park later, and the nerds are examining Professor Mackey's diagram chart thing again. Remember I said earlier how Ogashira had an idea completely out of the blue and by sheer luck she ended up being right? Behold, the hungry origami solution.
This chemical schematic is quite confusing.
Why'd he put it on paper instead of an electronic file?
Perhaps it's meant to be folded? You know, with a lot of us eating now, it makes me wonder about Gojira there. Do you think that it gets hungry?
Yeah, but look, the thing's got some really crooked teeth. It can't even prey on nuclear waste.
Origami. It's not eaten.
The next sequence goes into explaining what it is the nerds have figured out, and it's a hell of a thing to follow along with. Watching this through the first time, I thought I got it and understood it. Simply put, the incomprehensible flowchart that can transform basic elements into energy. The fold-in chart depicts the many ways in which the cell does this. Mixotrophs are organisms that can use multiple different sources of energy. Plants can get energy from the sun, the soil, and, in the case of carnivorous plants, insects too. Wait, wasn't Godzilla Earth supposed to be a giant plant? Blimey heck, these films have a worrying amount of things in common. Because, as Yagachi puts it,
what you're saying is that Gojira is not only a threat to mankind, but also an organism that could potentially be indestructible?
That's a leap, but alright. Again, the camera work is rather clever. We get to see everyone's reactions to the data up close and personal. We also get to see the data, but not in a way that means anything, meaning it's less work for some poor bastard in the writing room or visual effects department. I see what you did there, film. All of this is referred to as Mackey's riddle, as it was Professor Mackey who devised the theoretical cell before his disappearance and presumed death, and before Godzilla became a thing. This leads me back to one of the biggest recurring problems with the film, one that connects with events we've already witnessed.
Gojira's body has molecules that can do this, and the proof of this is in the unknown radioactive isotope. I'm sure of it.
Professor Mackey theorized that a creature with ancient biology could be mutated from radioactive waste. He predicted the mutant could have cells that would convert basic elements into energy, making it highly adaptable. All this he theorized and printed out before his disappearance. All this is then found, studied, and used as a foundation to build theories surrounding Godzilla, the results of which lead to this lot deciding that yes, the plan will work. This is all theoretical, and despite having samples of Godzilla to play with, no mention is made of examining them to see if all the theorizing is accurate. For all they know, everything Professor Mackey and, by extension they, had just come up with could have been utter rubbish. But then, everything stated in this scene was
1 week later.
It's not the cell membrane itself, but an extremophile configuration that inhibits cell membrane activity.
Before the chart was deciphered, they were going ahead with the plan. After the chart was deciphered, they went ahead with the plan. Working out what the chart meant added, took away, and changed nothing. What was the point of all this? The chart only wasted time, bringing the execution of the plan closer to the deadline of the nuke. Speaking of, the new Prime Minister is informed the plan is ready and needs his approval. Mr. Soggy Noodles is initially reluctant because the American nuclear strike is imminent. But after literally one line from Izumi and one line from Agasaka, the Prime Minister changes his mind and signs off on the plan.
All due respect, why let other nations blow our country up when we could save it?
Perhaps it's time that Japan did as it pleased.
Keep that last line in your back pocket for later. We also get this little tidbit.
Some say the US seeks a quick resolution for one primary reason, and that's to bury their knowledge of Gojira.
This is a final and overt declaration of what we've been seeing so far in Shin Godzilla. From using Japanese resources to find Professor Mackey, essentially a lost asset to the US Department of Energy, to keeping Godzilla a Japan-American affair because of the unique isotopes he produces, even when the rest of the world wants to get involved, to working with the Japanese misfits to gather intel on Godzilla, and finally to bombing the crap out of Godzilla, not to save Japan, but to save themselves, and to cover up their involvement.
Its body is harboring new elements that are unknown to science.
Well, this certainly explains why the U.S. Department of Energy moved so quickly.
Let's go.
The Defense Secretary wants to use a warhead against Godzilla, because there's now a 13% chance of Godzilla landing on the West Coast.
Add all this together with these lines.
It's easy for them to say with us in far-off Asia.
Post-war Japan is a tributary state.
Post-war extends forever, huh?
As well as this choice sentiment from later on.
Japan has grown up enough to have international trade deals on the sly.
The film gives the impression that America, at least in Shin Godzilla, considers Japan to be a lesser country, suitable only to be used and abused. Because of this, everything America has done under the guise of helping Japan has actually been about helping themselves. But the nuke is a step too far, and even those initially accepting of it don't take much persuading when an alternative arises. There's also some stuff to do with philosophies being introduced in the film, but we'll talk about those later. The plan is ready, and having been signed off on by the Prime Minister, it finally gets an official name.
You have a name for this plan?
Yashiori, after the legendary sake that felled a Hydra.
With the Yashiori plan going ahead in spite of the nuclear strike, a delay is needed to get everything together. In the end, this is achieved with the help of France, which, jumping ahead briefly, leads to this delightful scene. Now that's showing respect. This is where we get the grown-up line from, but also another interesting sentiment.
Nuclear weapons.
This follows suit with earlier scenes when the previous Japanese Prime Minister made bad decisions based on public opinion and/or seniority in the hierarchy. And despite the overly negative light Shin Godzilla shines on anything American, it also tells us that, just like the Japanese government, not every government body is entirely of one mind. Shades of grey and all that. No, not like that. Stop it. Despite this warning, she's off to lend a hand. I'm sorry, what? This is yet another unfortunate side effect of Shin Godzilla. It has a lot of political doohickery going on as is, whilst also trying to maintain its pace. It's understandable that certain things have to be left by the wayside to allow the film to flow and not get bogged down in too much red tape. How is helping with the Ashiori plan in literally a scene cut? I would very much like to know what happened there. Rather than reactive. Not only is this in contrast to the first Prime Minister who, admittedly against his own judgment, died trying to leave Ground Zero, but it's also a shrewd political move on Yagachi's part. His being Prime Minister was discussed earlier and is being discussed as he tries to leave.
You want his job?
Not right now, but maybe in 10 years.
By leading from the front on the mission to save Japan, he's shown to be strong, heroic, all that good stuff needed to be an inspiring leader. If the plan succeeds, he will be held up as a hero and a popular choice as the next Prime Minister. Alternatively, if the plan doesn't work, then he's at least shown to risk his own skin, giving him some merit. Or he might be killed, which will save him all sorts of trouble. Plus, you know, if the plan fails, then Japan is either going to be nuked, or Godzilla is going to take over the world. Hell, maybe even both for all we know, and Yagachi might not want to be around for all that. Shrewd. Very shrewd. Before the Ashiori plan begins, Yagachi gives the troops a rousing speech, and I can't help but imagine this was the sort of speech given to cleanup crews going into Chernobyl.
Operation Yashiori will be dangerous! The risk of radiation exposure could result in both sickness and death. I cannot promise that all of you will make it back. But know that your work will matter! The future of Japan is now in your hands! Protect it!
The fact he's going with them only makes his decision more heroic. But it doesn't quite draw attention away from his hair. What is this? Dragon Ball Evolution? Actually, it's more like a Japanese Doctor Who if they'd only ever seen number 10. And that has been brainstormed, calculated, and resourced since before Godzilla's fourth form appeared. It's a plan that was formalized and prepared for, even as the rest of the Japanese government were giving up on saving Tokyo. Those in charge focused on saving face, while the film portrays the government as slow-moving, politically focused bureaucrats too blinded by procedure to get anything done. The Ashiori plan and those who came up with it represent the plucky underdog spirit of those willing to go against the grain to do what's right. It is the last, best hope for Tokyo. And it's bullshit. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was entertaining, informative, and in some cases, eye-opening. Part 3 will be out in a few weeks' time, all going well and barring any apocalypses, alien invasions, etc. Make sure you're subscribed so you know when that happens. Feel free to do all the other YouTube things whilst you're here, and links to my Patreon page and Etsy store will be in the description as always. Once again, thank you for watching.